Hi, everyone, and welcome to the S Group's Be MedTech seminar webinar. We've got Anthony Ginsberg all the way from Los Angeles. He's a South African, grew up in Cape Town. I think he grew up in Cape Town, but he grew up in South Africa, and he's in Los Angeles, and he's going to tell you some very interesting things on what's happening in the world of MedTech. And Martin Diggle from Cape Town, but he's actually a Brit living in Cape Town, lives up the road from me in Bishop's Court, and a great friend of mine. Fancy moustache, kind of a gunslinger moustache. And then you've met this guy over here, and Dorian Prostishimi. He gets mad at me every time. I did well this time. So guys, welcome everyone. Martin, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about you, yourself, and what you're doing, and then we'll get Anthony to take it on from there. Tell us what you do.
Thank you, Rob.
And how you make money.
I have been investing in biotech for over 20 years now, privately. And with my brother, I founded Developers Life Sciences Fund in 2012. It's a very concentrated biotech fund specializing in gene and cell therapy. We have two very clever scientists who advise us on our investments, because it's a very good thing, because neither my brother and I are trained scientists. We're actually economists and financiers. So we need their excellent input. We have returned about 250% since we started our fund in 2012, quite highly concentrated. We're actually fairly activist. I sit on the board of 4 of our investments. We're fairly concentrated. We've only got 8 or 9 investments in the fund. But as I said, we focus in cell and gene therapy, in immunology and oncology. Have been our main areas of investment. And obviously the COVID pandemic has really focused the world very much on the opportunities in the biotech and health sector. And I think it's going to present some fascinating opportunities and some challenges, which I'm happy to talk about later. But I think one of the main things it's been a theme in the world for the last few years, and I think this will be accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, is that people are increasingly look to invest in things that are good for the world, good for mankind, not just to make a return on capital. And I think in this new world, biotech and life sciences are going to be clear winners in terms of investing to make money, but also doing good. So I think it's going to be a fascinating time. There will be challenges, but some huge opportunities.
And Martin, tell us about how good you were at squash when you were at university. How good at squash was
I was only the second team, Rob. I was only the second team, but okay. I'm still trying.
Dorian, do you want to ask Martin one question, then we'll move to Anthony? Dorian, do you want to ask Martin one question before we move to Anthony?
Yes, sorry, I was so Martin, when I first met you about 15 years ago now, you were very concentrated and focused on Russian investments. It's a big change. What made you make the change?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, it was partly down to the fact that Russia, as we just discussed before we were online, really became uninvestable after around 2010. So I decided I had to make myself relevant by doing what I thought I was good at. And as I said earlier, I've been passionately investing in biotech on a personal level, with mixed success, I have to say, since 2000. And I decided that if we were going to turn it into a successful business, we really needed to bring some scientific genius on board to help us with our investment decisions. And it was something I was very passionate about. You know, our family had some money which we'd made from other investments over the years, and we were inspired to do this. And it's something I've become incredibly passionate about, and it's something I love to do. So it's been a fortunate combination of circumstances. And you know, in hindsight, our decision to leave Russia in 2010 was a very good one, given what's happened there ever since.
So, guys, I'm going to move now to Anthony. Anthony's in Los Angeles, but he's probably just woken up. And Marty and Dorian, if you can put on your microphones. Anthony, born in South Africa, went to Los Angeles. Tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us what you do.
Yes, I think my claim to fame is Western Province tennis under 12. How about that? And being tear gassed at UCT in the mid to late 80s, I was very fortunate. I actually did a thesis at UCT on offshore tax havens, Jersey, Isle of Man, Cayman, all those hotspots, and was very lucky to get a position at Solomon Brothers in the early 90s, and subsequently ran a unit at Barclays, was called Barclays Offshore Services. I was on the Exco. We had all these wonderful hotspots to travel to, Turks and Caicos and Cayman and Cyprus, etc., Isle of Man. And then they actually did a book, just very quickly, called South Africa's Future, which got another 1 minute of fame for me back in the late 90s. It was just a treatise about some of the economic challenges. I've actually now lived more of my life in the US. I was in New York, Rob, actually, originally, and my wife's from Los Angeles. That's why I'm here. And yeah, it's the middle of summer here. We're into our 32, 33 degree temperature. But I look forward to updating you chaps on the healthcare innovation space. Do you want me just to dive in? Because I know we've got a couple of slides to run through. You know, obviously, I'm not going to just talk about COVID-19. We launched this ETF some years ago. Our company, Gins Global, is actually an index fund business. We run both ETFs listed on the London, Frankfurt, and Milan stock exchanges across the tech space primarily. We have a cloud technology ETF. We have one that's very broad, covering innovation from cybersecurity to 5G, and then a very specific one on healthcare. We have about 18 other index funds, and we run money for mostly foreign groups, a lot of insurance companies actually. In South Africa, we still work with Old Mutual and Sanlam, so I still practice my Afrikaans every now and again. So ek vloek die taal, ek praat 'n bietjie every couple of days still, believe it or not. And I do tend to come down there once a year. And I still certainly miss South Africa a lot. So on the healthcare front, it's very exciting. Obviously, the press has been talking about the likes of telemedicine, medical wearables, all these robotics even, areas that actually up until, I would say, 5 years ago, healthcare technology was not really at the forefront of the big tech space. When you think about the big technology firms, whether it's Amazon or the Googles of the world, the FANGs as they call it, a lot of their original expenditure was not in the space. It was in e-retailing and other areas. What you've seen just very briefly in the last 3 to 4 years is increasing the big boys, including Google with their DeepMind operation. They've actually invested a ton of money in the medical space. So although I'm a financial chap, and a lot of the finance guys were getting scared some years ago that the big Silicon Valley boys were going to come into the financial space and launch banks or fund management groups, the truth is there's a ton more money for them and less regulation in the healthcare area. And that covers everything from what Tim Cook says his legacy will be for Apple, which is the medical wearable space, from the Apple Watch to some other areas where they're able to essentially help with epidemics that we have in the States here, like diabetes, where they can actually monitor people's pulse rates and blood sugar levels. So I thought I'd take you through a few slides. Let me see if I can find them. So we may need Lauren's help just to get the slides up, and then I'll shoot you through. Thank you, Lauren. So here you see the doctor coming out of the TV screen. And what's happened, for those of you in the UK, you're probably well aware that the NHS actually has done quite a remarkable job for their consultants and their doctors to work from home. So the idea of telehealth or telemedicine has really seen quite a significant boost. And there's quite a lot of fast tracking that's occurred just in the last couple of months. Some of those companies have been operational for some years. So what they say is that the future has actually been brought into the present. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of the slides. Let's see if I can get to the next one. And more than happy to take some questions, Rob, as well. This is just a brief background on our own ETF, how it's recovered since the March lows. And it's actually up about 10.5, 11% for the 12-month period. It's actually turned positive over the last 2 weeks. This doesn't cover the last couple of weeks in May. But the point about our ETF and a number of other players in healthcare is we're quite broad. We actually have over 80 holdings, and it covers these sub-themes. The reason I wanted to just go through these is to show you that it's everything from biotech, which in America we define as biological engineering. So the guys who are at the forefront of the vaccine research at the moment, one of our largest holdings is Regeneron. They're one of the top 3 at the moment trying to really sort out a vaccine. That's biological engineering. Then you've got things like healthcare trackers, medical devices, neuroscience, robotics. I just wanted to mention it's quite significantly different healthcare innovation because it's focusing on technology and healthcare. So we don't have the traditional big pharmaceutical entities that many of you may be aware of, like Merck or Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. We tend to be in the space where ultimately some of those large pharmaceutical players may make acquisitions in the space. But this is really healthcare technology focused. And this ETF, like most ETFs, really are a broad, low-cost way, inexpensive way, really, for investors to access the space. So you get roughly 80-odd companies. And what we've done is we've actually capped the largest companies at 4%, so that we never overweight, in a dramatic sense, one particular company over another. I'm going to move on and let's see.
Anthony, and tell us which the hot sectors are, and are there any names of any of these companies we would know? I mean, we all know GSK, Amgen, the big ones, but do any of us know these smaller ones?
Well, they're not that small, actually. The largest one you'll know, it's in our top 10 holdings, is Medtronic. I mean, Medtronic is a huge animal. It's the largest medical device company. It's in the Fortune 500. It's in the S&P 500. So we do go from large caps all the way down to small caps. Our minimum requirements are that the company essentially has to have close to $500 million of market cap, and it has to be liquid enough to be in an ETF or exchange traded fund format. So it's got to be able to be traded daily. Besides Medtronics, which is global and really in the medical device space, I just wanted to mention Medtronics are active now. They're one of the largest in the ventilator space too, and also respirators. So they're obviously benefiting, and they're up about 45 to 50% year to date. Some other names are in the genetic area. Biotech is a very large firm called BioNTech. It's worth in the 20 billions. I mentioned Regeneron. Then in terms of some others, Seegene is a leader in gene therapies. They've actually also done remarkably well. They're up almost 180% year to date. I'll go through a couple of other names, perhaps when I discuss some of the other holdings. So what I wanted to just touch on, Rob, is how AI and robotics is actually working in healthcare, because the space of healthcare innovation is quite broad. It's everywhere from precision medicine, which really is gene therapies, all the way through to robotic surgery. There's a company you may have heard of. It's also a Fortune 500 called Intuitive Surgical. They've actually been at the forefront for a decade or longer with robotic surgery. Very interesting that the recovery time from robotic surgery is twice as fast in the hospital as regular surgery. So they've been very innovative in leasing their equipment and making it cheaper for hospitals, including the NHS in the UK. But it started in the US. This is Intuitive Surgical I'm referring to. And they have this thing called the Da Vinci system. There's actually a slide coming up where the doctor is literally 10 feet away from the patient, and everything is done through robots on the surgical floor. And I guess the point really is that the incisions are 1/4 to 1/3 the size of a normal human incision. So this area of robotic surgery has been very, very attractive to investors, and it's certainly one of our sub-themes in this ETF. So essentially we have 8 sub-themes, which I'm just going to run through. An area that is getting a lot of attention, obviously, is virtual assistants or chatbots, where you actually dial in remotely. And I should just mention that in the ICU units, for cleansing purposes, for sanitation reasons, robots are being used, and a lot of telehealth or telemedicine is being adopted, where they can basically check people's not just pulses or blood sugar levels, but there are a number of other areas. So I have a slide coming up just showing that. For those of you in the UK, you may have heard of Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, near Moorgate, and they adopted something from Google. This is what the American big tech guys are doing. They're spending a fortune. It's from Amazon, Google, all the big guys are getting into healthcare administration and also diagnostic treatments using computers. So what they've done is by aggregating, and there are some privacy issues, of course, here surrounding this, but they've aggregated wards or literally millions of patient data to try and supersede even the average doctor's diagnostic ability. So Moorfields at the eye hospital in London, before you ever see a consultant or a doctor, you actually go through a screening process with it's essentially a medical device, a computer that screens your cornea. Apparently it looks at your retina as well. And they basically do a diagnostic screening, and it's able to speed up and actually improve the accuracy of eye treatment. So with that, I'll just move on. I mean, the healthcare AI space alone is just under, about 150 billion at the moment. It's broken up into these various subcategories, from robotic surgery, which I mentioned a bit earlier on, to virtual nursing assistants. There are these clinical trial identifiers, there's connected machines. So AI and healthcare certainly, Rob, a very exciting area. The wearable space also covers some of this. So let me see if I can just flip through. If you look at our holdings, just on the right-hand side is a traditional pharmaceutical index where you'll see Pfizer, J&J, Merck, Roche. Now, the only crossover that we have with our holdings on the top left would be really Medtronic. Medtronic is probably number 8 on a traditional MSCI index. It's one of our largest holdings at the moment. And again, they are completely global. Boston Scientific is a sizable player in the space as well, and they're benefiting at the moment through COVID-19 laboratories and research. They're one of our larger holdings too. So if you just go through the list there, Edwards Life Sciences, I'm certainly happy to give you a bit more specifics on them as well. I actually had some details on Edwards Life Sciences. Has actually been one of the best performers recently. Again, they're a Fortune 500. So our universe is not just micro caps or small caps. We're actually, investing in some of these companies have been around 30, 40 years, but they've been branching out increasingly into some of the more innovative areas and space. Regeneron is a purely biotech player and one of the forefront leaders now, not just looking at COVID-19, but in vaccine research in general. If I could just segue and tell you that gene therapy or genomics is an area that's also been brought to the fore. There's a lot more money essentially being thrown at this area. Historically, I would say healthcare in the US, it's quite a screwed up place, as we say here, because if you're in New York and you get sick in California, there's not an NHS, there's not a single healthcare system. And that's one of the reasons why wearables and also buying into these patient records is going to allow big tech to play a much more active role. Warren Buffett, incidentally, along with Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and Jeff Bezos at Amazon, they set up JV just about 2 years ago to help with medical record and administration, because again, if you get sick in California as a New Yorker, heaven knows if they'll ever find your records. It's actually quite a messy situation here. And we have some massive challenges with the baby boomer generation costing a fortune in healthcare prevention. America essentially spends about 4 times as much on the average patient as they do in Europe, apparently. So it's a very inefficient system in the States. It really requires more technology. And so there's some exciting developments. I actually believe that COVID-19 is fast-tracking some of the development. It's actually forcing folks to actually finally focus their attention here rather than maybe in online retailing and some other space where it's traditionally been. I'll just focus. We've got a few more slides. I'm aware of time and want Martin to be able to jump in as well. This just summarizes how America has really dominated the medical device market and just the growth that's predicted over the last, basically to 2025. So the growth rate, the compound annual growth rate here is predicted to be about 18 to 20%. Again, dominated by the States, but medical device companies at the moment in our own ETF are the largest in the market cap space. They've been around longer, not just Medtronics, but there are a number of other players, Edward Life Sciences as well, from ventilators to stents to other areas where you hear about implants. So this space tends to dominate healthcare innovation, but the weightings are going down. At the moment, medical devices is about 30% actually of our fund. I hope you can hear me. It seems a bit of feedback. I'll just jump onto telehealth. And telehealth, obviously there's been a lot more coverage recently, but it's been around for a while. All of a sudden, my doctor friends in North London, they're all working from home. They're scared out of their minds, some of them anyway, about going into the hospitals. So most consultants, I believe, in the NHS, if they can, whether they're using Zoom or other programs, it's becoming a lot more mainstream. The prediction actually is that it's going to quadruple in size in just the next 3 to 4 years. This is telemedicine or telehealth. It's not nearly as big as medical devices, but it's growing fast. So that's another exciting area we can touch on later. Just to summarize on the medical remote side, or medical wearables, as they say, Apple is at one of the forefronts here. So is Google. Even though we don't own those companies, they're purchasing players that we own. We actually owned Fitbit until recently, and Fitbit was bought out by Google for $2.5 billion. They weren't even making a ton of money, Fitbit, at the time, but it's seen as a wonderful platform and launching pad for the likes of Google. That's why they went ahead with the purchase. Just medical remote monitoring covers everything from a remote physician to a pulse oximeter. You may be able to see. I don't know if I think the slide moved on, but this is the compound annual growth rate of about 40% predicted annually. So it's a massive space, from diabetes to sleep tracking to fitness monitoring, like the Fitbits of the world. But expect big players like Apple and others to really get into the space by making acquisitions. So we actually, part of our holdings are in the mid-cap and small-cap space, and we see their valuations rising because there's increasing M&A activity in this area. So something that's been lost on the media, perhaps, in the coverage of all of this, is that because of antitrust rules, the big tech players can't really go and buy each other. Obviously, we have an election coming up in the States. So the M&A activity is more in the mid-cap and smaller cap space where we see activity arising. There have already been a number of smaller acquisitions. Again, it hasn't always been covered by the media, but it's coming fast and furiously. There are predictions, actually, that something of the order of $100 billion of M&A activity are in the works for the rest of the year. Again, mostly in the mid-cap and small-cap space. Let me just finish off and go through 2 more slides, if you don't mind. This is an example of the Da Vinci robotic surgery, where you've got doctors literally a couple of feet away from the patient. And the whole idea is it's going to bring the cost down in terms of recovery time and hospital stays. And as I mentioned earlier on, the incisions are a quarter to a third the size, according to surgeons we've spoken with. So there's one massive player in this space called Intuitive Surgical. They've seen a big spike up in their share price over the last 18 months as well. And then just finally, just to show you how the surgery area works. Most of it's in general surgery, but it's growing in gynecology and orthopedics. And until recently, one of the things that held back robotic surgeries was that you had to actually spend $2 to $3 million as a hospital on the device itself, the actual machines. They've now finally woken up, Intuitive Surgical, and I mentioned earlier, are leasing these machines globally. So all of a sudden you find folks like the NHS and others embracing it and basically paying a subscription service. And it's a little bit like cloud computing in a way. Cloud computing is very easy to adopt when you're reducing your hardware and your on-site costs. And we've seen obviously a massive shift to cloud computing. I just wanted to touch on cloud because cloud computing is actually facilitating medical wearables. It's facilitating a number of areas such as chatbots and telehealth. So the more that the internet has proven resilient, even though people were nervous with possibly YouTube or Netflix flooding the system as work from home became predominant over the last 3 months. The good news is it's held up significantly well, and cloud and innovative health actually are symbiotic. They actually are not in two separate worlds. There's actually quite a close correlation. So I think with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Martin and answer any questions later on.
Sure, Anthony. Actually, thank you very much for that. That was very thorough. I just one thought that I had is that if you look back at the last decade or so, the hot areas in biotech have been regenerative medicine, oncology, immunology, cell and gene therapy, and up until this recent COVID outbreak, there's been very little investment either by government or in the private sector into infectious diseases. It's been somewhat of an overlooked area, and it's been the cause of companies like Glaxo, for example, in Europe, and Gilead to a lesser extent in the United States, underperforming. Do you see this, with the raised profile of infectious diseases and the huge amount of government funding that we're going to see coming into this area, that could become, I think, quite a sexy area in biotech and present some opportunities? Yeah,
it is a very sexy area. I think the tricky part is we don't even know if there'll ever be a vaccine actually for even COVID-19. There have been a lot of stops and starts. I think that the challenge is some of the big boys found that doing vaccines for the likes of Ebola and others didn't always have a big payback. I mean, the ROIs on these things have been very, very slow. So sadly, some of the larger pharmaceutical chaps haven't been that motivated, frankly, to spend a ton of energy in this area. Obviously, COVID-19 could be a game changer because you literally need 7 billion people to be inoculated. But you're right, it's been a sleepy area. I will just mention that the gene therapy guys have been able to fast track this. When the Chinese in early January came out with the whole gene sequence for COVID-19, everybody in the genetic space jumped into it, and actually frankly are ahead of the big pharma guys. I know there's some news in the UK with AstraZeneca and the Oxford group, but if you look at the States, from Gilead to Moderna to Regeneron, the one we've got a large holding in, they tend to be actually some of the smaller players and some of the guys coming out of the genomics area who actually help with precision medicine. Genomics, by the way, is all about precision targeting. And actually, our view, Martin, is that the gene therapy guys, gene editing like CRISPR, that for us is a game changer because it speeds everything up. I mean, Bill Gates and others who've been recently quite active in the media are talking about faster ways to have vaccines rather than the typical 5-6 years that it would take. It could well be, because we talk about SARS and MERS and these other infections that occurred. It took years and years to even get close to where we are today. Everything's been fast-tracked with genomics. Just to give you a quick idea, it used to cost about $100,000 to do a complete gene workup of an individual patient. Today, it's down to about $700. So here in the US, you can go into your regular hospital and get a full gene workup. So the idea is that medicines will be much more focused and more precision targeted on me rather than somebody across the street who also has the same cancer, but looking at your gene workup. So my answer to you is perhaps indirect. We see the genomic space working directly with infectious diseases and speeding it up. And we're betting probably more on the gene therapy area than just the traditional big pharma boys.
Yeah, and that's the area that we've always been very focused on, cell and gene therapy as well. In fact, we are the largest shareholders in Oxford Biomedica, who are very much center space of the Oxford vaccine group, so that's obviously a very exciting space and one which I know something about. I think in a bigger picture, in terms of one of the concerns that I have recently, in terms of investing in biotech generally in the post-COVID world, is that I do sense there's been somewhat of a pushback from the media, from, if you want to say that, the millennial generation, and even from some big pharma, concerns about a sort of almost like a sort of guilt about anyone making money out of providing a solution towards the COVID pandemic. It seems to be fine in the modern world for guys who invent TikTok to make, a very quick 10 to 15 billion, or Amazon, Jeff Bezos to make an extra 5 billion a day by delivering groceries to people's houses. But if you were considered to be making any money out of providing the human race with the vaccine for COVID-19, then God forbid you can make any money out of that. So I think that's an issue which has concerned me, and if that is the future for medicine in general and biotech, that politicians and society finds it ever more unpalatable that companies make money out of servicing health systems, I do think that's a general question mark. It's possibly less of a case in the more capitalist United States, but it's certainly raising its head in Europe.
Well, it's a good question, because with our election a few months away here in the US, healthcare is literally either number one or number two in terms of political issues in the US. Everybody knows it's an inefficient, crappy system, quite frankly, although there's some argument about whether we would ever have an NHS idea here, because there's some pushback. But the truth is, there's massive wastage in the American system. It needs to be reformed. It is a for-profit system here. The average individual is spending, with a family of four, probably $30,000 to $40,000 a year on reasonable health care. I'm talking about the middle class and slightly above. So it's costing the US taxpayer a fortune. It needs to be reformed. And there's a lot of pushback against the health insurers here. I will just say, on the innovative side, I mentioned it earlier on, but I have to say it's not being covered. It's a little bit under the radar, but big tech, there are reasons why Tim Cook over at Apple and others are saying their legacy is going to be in the healthcare space. It's easier for them to jump in, actually, interestingly. It's not as highly regulated in terms of patient record keeping, sharing medical data, because you've basically got for-profit healthcare systems who run, one group will run 200 hospitals in California, another will run 60 hospitals in the New York tri-state area. So yes, I think there'll be faster movers here, perhaps than Europe, in terms of adopting some of this innovation. They want to actually save costs. If they can get a patient in and out of their hospital twice as fast, why not use robotic surgery? Or the precision targeted medicine that has been on the cutting board. This is particularly on the gene editing side. There's more and more demand for we have an opioid crisis here, where everybody, sadly, there have been more deaths, frankly, in the opioid market here than anywhere else in the last 3 to 4 years. It's been a disaster. A lot of people taking the wrong drugs. So the idea of precision medicine has become quite a mainstream concept. And as gene therapies become cheaper and cheaper, there will be more. The word here is called customized or personalized care, but that's something that also needs to be on people's radar. It's going to be coming faster and more furiously. I think even with COVID's issue, people realize everybody's got a different makeup. Giving everybody the same drug doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense.
Anthony, we're going to get Dorian. Dorian's going to dive in now with the Q&A from the audience. You can look at the chat box.
All right. So, Martin, you've already kind of answered, but maybe we could get into a little bit more detail. James Gubb is asking, what is your single best investment idea and why?
It's a tough one. I've got several favorites. I think in terms of my own experience of investing in biotech, my most successful investment thus far has been Oxford Biomedica. We're probably up about 6 times on that investment over the last 7-8 years. But that's become quite a big company now. Its market cap is over $750 million. I still think it's probably extremely cheap. But in terms of a smaller cap that I think is very exciting and has incredible upside, I would probably say a company called ScanCell, which is a spin out of Nottingham University. It's basically using immunology and cancer vaccines for its core competence. But they have also now got a possible T-cell therapy for COVID, which is a next generation and probably perhaps a more sustainable vaccine because it stimulates a T-cell response, not just an immune system response, which could last for over 5 or 10 years. So that, I think, could be very exciting. The market cap of that company is only £30 million. They potentially got cures for lung cancer, skin cancer, pancreatic, and now COVID. So it's obviously a very small company, but in terms of risk reward, I think that is perhaps one of the most exciting things that we have in our portfolio at the moment. It's not one of these enormous companies that, like some of the companies that Anthony's been talking about, but if you were looking, I think, for a good risk reward option in the European biotech space, I particularly like ScanCell.
Thanks, Martin. And I think we should just remind people that these stocks can be extremely volatile and very risky.
Yes, biotech investing is, as we know, not for the faint-hearted. And I will have a caveat that investing in a fund like Anthony's, where it's diversified and often very large cap stocks, is fine. But I think if you're investing in specific, especially the small cap biotech stocks, unless you've done your scientific homework, which we have 2 or 3 people that do that for us in depth over months and months, then it is a risky business. Even when you do your scientific homework, it can be a very risky business. Because these early stage pioneering technologies, a lot can go wrong, as Anthony knows.
Yeah. So there's a question for Leon, from Leon for Anthony, which you've sort of answered, so maybe we should skim through this quickly. Anthony, in your opinion, who will be the big beneficiaries from COVID-19? So far, I've seen big contracts and revenue with some big companies.
Yes, well, it's a good question. Actually, as Martin mentioned earlier on, in the minute there's some news about a vaccine possibly looking good, although you have to go through a minimum of 3 stages here. Of course, last week, all the news was about Moderna. If you turned on 3 weeks ago, it was about Gilead. They're rather volatile. We actually have been very careful to really focus on basically 8 underlying sub-themes, from gene therapies all the way through to vaccines, which really is biotech, but medical devices, all these areas, and nanotechnology, they all cover healthcare innovation and personalized medicine. So for us, the bigger picture really is where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years? We don't think the average American is going to be treated the same way as they have been treated. So the big winners, we believe, will be a number of the gene therapy players. There will be biotech players as well, but even the medical device guys and these robotic surgery chaps like Intuitive Surgical, medical devices, we're talking about firms like Medtronic, which already is a big company. It's quite broadly spread. I'm a big proponent of personalized medicine. We already see at the better hospitals in the US that personalized medicine is coming to the fore. So yeah, we're not betting the farm on just one particular area, such as vaccine research. We actually think it's quite a broad spectrum. Big tech, all the ideas of using remote technology will certainly help telehealth, wearables. So it's not just one particular area. That's partly why we have over 80 holdings now. We don't know where all the 10 baggers are going to be. I have to be honest with you. I'm a finance guy, but we're trying to give our investors a broad swath of holdings across the board.
Great. There's another question from Tanaka. There is a lot of narrative around COVID-19 being seen as an overplayed risk factor in terms of how it can be mitigated against. Which group within your ETF portfolio is artificially inflating temporary performance with a correction coming quickly? I think someone's looking for a short idea there.
Well, obviously, till the end of February, everybody was doing reasonably well. We had, like everybody else, a drop-off in March. I think there was a slide earlier on. You saw a bit of a drop-off, but it's come back strongly. The ones that are inflated, in my opinion, are the ones that are making some of the news. We don't actually own Gilead or Moderna. Moderna is a relatively small player. So those virus chaps, I think that they're the ones that are the most volatile at the moment. I'd be rather careful of some of those individual news headlines that came out last week again.
Yeah, if I could chip in, Anthony, there. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think like something like, for example, Moderna, I think is up around 700% year to date. And I think there was on the day after they announced some rather questionable data, which they dressed up to look brilliant. Some of the senior people at the board level actually sold quite a few shares, which I think is always a bit of a warning light to me. I think for any individual investor, particularly in something that's very, very frothy, like the COVID space, I think you have to be incredibly careful not to chase these things too long, because if you get holding the baby when the tide goes out, and it's a mixed metaphor if ever I heard one, you can get very badly burned. So I think my advice for anyone who's looking at these smaller cap stocks, particularly that get very frothy, is only ever do it with a small amount of money that you can afford to lose, because it can get very dangerous.
That sounds like very good advice. Question from Martin. I note you have a large position in, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, Proteome
Sciences.
Yes. Is it a good future bet? And that's from Barra.
It's an interesting question. Well, actually, that has been the worst performing holding in our biotech fund over the years. Struggling company based on this rather sort of pioneering science of proteomics, which, unlike genomics, never really took off. Although at the level of the protein, one can actually learn a lot more about the human body than the level of the gene, because it's more complex. But proteomics hasn't really taken off. We were probably 10 years too early to that extent. The company was run by a very sort of, what shall I say, messianic CEO who probably was too fixated on some of their early therapeutic possibilities, and he ignored their core business competence, which was basically biomarker services. So after many years, we basically managed to get a new CEO in place, change the business model. It's gone from really a 150, 200 million pound market cap company to around 15 million, but is finally for the first time making a profit. And I think at this sort of level of valuation, it's probably cheap. And I think they've got a very interesting product called TMT, which we sell to Thermo Fisher for some of their mass spec devices. And I think at this sort of valuation, it's probably rather cheap. So at this level, you'd expect me to say it because we are the largest shareholder. But I think Proteome Sciences is finally, after many, many years, looking like a good turnaround story and probably a good investment at this level.
Okay. Question for Anthony from Jake Glass. Are any of the funds holding any CRSPR tech?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's a very good question. CRISPR. Well, yes, CRISPR is at the forefront of gene editing, and yes, a number of the holdings. I'll just mention one holding that's up dramatically. Actually, it's called C-Gene. It's actually up about almost 200% over the last 4 months, and the reason is that CRISPR is one of the areas that is seen to fast track vaccine research. There are a couple of other areas, as Martin knows, but it's a lot cheaper than actually going through the regular process of trials. I mean, once the Chinese came out with the gene workup, the full workup of the genetic code for COVID-19, you found that a lot of the gene therapy groups, such as C-Gene, got re-rated. And even a firm like Moderna, quite frankly, is really using a form of gene therapy to try and fast track research. So yes, CRISPR is actually at the forefront of the area called genomics, or gene editing. So yes, so there are about 5 or 6 different sub-holdings that we have that are primarily US-based. C-Gene, which is SEE, gene being one of the best performers of the year so far.
Okay. Jake, with another question for Anthony. Have you seen any correlation between the performance of your funds and the XLV?
Well, the correlation is that everybody sort of suffered in March. The question really is, how quickly have they rebounded since sort of March 21st, when the lows were hit? I mean, what we found with some of the larger funds, the big pharma kind of companies, they haven't rebounded to the same extent. So they're not actually up in the positive territory for the year. This one we called WELL, W-E-L-L, our ETF on innovative tech. It's obviously been boosted by what's going on with telehealth and telemedicine wearables, and XLV and some of the bigger name pharma ETFs haven't rebounded to that extent. So some of them are actually still down for the year, whereas the more innovative healthcare ETFs like our own tend to be already in positive territory. So they've outperformed really in the last couple of months.
Okay. So a question from James Gubb again for Anthony. Martin, sorry, we will come back to you in a second. How has your fund performed relative to the S&P Biotech Index over the long and short term?
Okay, so the S&P Biotech has been rather volatile. It's gone through some good phases. Let me just, but what we've noticed with that is that it shoots the lights out for a period of time, and then it doesn't do very much. I guess we've tried to be more of a steady Eddie player. So over the last 3.5, 4 years, we've matched it. We've actually done slightly better than them, but there have been periods where they'll shoot up. We tend to be a sort of more diversified but broader play because we're not just doing biotech. And Martin, you want to jump in, but biotech by its nature tends to get re-rated at some points and really has a huge run up, and then it can soften and not do very much for a period of time. We've tried to focus a lot more broadly than just that.
Yeah, I think fair to say that Anthony and I's business models are very different. I mean, Anthony is investing in the US biotech sector in a very sort of broad, diversified way, and one of the reasons that our fund is focused on Europe and the UK in particular is that there isn't this enormous multi-billion-dollar fund of money to invest in biotech in Europe. In fact, one of the big problems which we've had in the UK, which is why valuations are so much lower in Europe than they are in the States, is that there's a very, very limited pool of money in Europe. And that creates opportunities in terms of the valuations are significantly lower than in the States. But it also presents a problem in what we call the half-built bridge issue, in that you can often raise early stage funding from small startup biotechs in the UK, but then once you get to a certain point, you can't finish the bridge and get to the other side where you actually become a successful company, which is why a lot of very promising young biotech startups in Europe have been snapped up by canny Americans who come in much sort of later stage and manage to buy up some brilliant technology for virtually nothing. One of the things that I think will be very interesting for the European biotech sector in the next decade is I think you will increasingly see very high market cap US tech and biotech companies coming in to pick up some very interesting targets. And I think we will see an acceleration in M&A activity in the European biotech sector because of that. I think it's going to become an increasingly interesting value driver for the European biotech sector.
Yeah, can I just jump in there for a moment? Yeah, sure. We actually see M&A activity in this space becoming increasingly active. It's one of the massive trends actually over the next couple of years. Interestingly, some of the big tech guys, because they're arguably overvalued, their currency is rather cheap. And relatively speaking, the PEs in this area, across healthcare innovation anyhow, are generally low. There's some biotech guys with high PEs in America. We actually have a global mandate. We can only invest actually in listed entities. But it's the small caps and the mid caps, part of what Martin's referring to, where they're actually undervalued. They actually haven't been fully priced. So watch the space for more M&A, and particularly in, I would say, genomics, biotech, but also precision medicine, anything where there can be more customized medical treatments, including wearables as well.
Another question from Jake Glass. I don't know which of you wants to answer this question. Following the cannabis webinar a few weeks ago, would love to hear your opinion on cannabis and the treatment of COVID-19, as it is rumored that cannabis may be used in COVID vaccines. I think cannabis is rumored to cure everything.
Martin, maybe I'll let you jump in on that one.
I do not. I mean, that's really one for the scientists. I haven't really followed the whole cannabis thing closely, and I would feel slightly fraudulent in even offering an opinion on that. I have to defer to you. I'm sorry, Anthony.
Well, the only thing I can tell you about cannabis is that there are one or two listed ETF vehicles, actually, believe it or not, listed on the LSE. But they tend to be a lot of Canadian companies. You're basically overexposed to what Canada's done. I guess a number of you probably are aware in South Africa that Canada has been at the forefront of licensing and legalizing it. So most of the companies are Toronto Stock Exchange listed, as far as I understand at the moment.
Dorian, can I quite
Sure.
an interesting question here from Mark Taylor on COVID and the new regime of surveillance in the world, and I think it's that is also something that I was going to talk about a little bit. I think the drive for the new sort of scale and speed of population data collection that the COVID pandemic is going to cause does create some opportunities, certainly in the data processing and technology tracking sectors. But I mean, I think it also does pose some quite serious issues for society. Do we want to live in a society where we may be slightly safer about getting some sort of nasty virus, but we surrender our privacy and those other very important issues? So I think that is a very good question. I think it's personally, as someone who I would describe myself loosely as a libertarian, I do find that whole COVID tracking idea that's coming in through many Western governments now extremely concerning. So sorry, I thought I'd butt in and answer that one for you.
Yeah, thank you. A question from Anella Cooper. Do you see a trend in consolidation and potential of genomic companies engaging in M&A, for example, 23andMe and MyHeritage, etc., to leverage off the data gathered in light of COVID-19?
Yes, we see more consolidation actually occurring in gene therapy, but you have to look at it very carefully. It's quite a broad space, and there have already been some acquisitions in the CRISPR area. This is one of the leading areas of gene editing. What I've actually seen recently is talk of some of the bigger boys coming in. You've got larger pharmaceutical players who've actually, Martin, this is something you may want to touch on. Historically, they were big into R&D, but there's been a huge shift in the last 10 years in research and development. It's basically been outsourced by the AstraZenecas of the world. Historically had everything in-house, everything was vertically integrated, and there's been a huge sea change, and many of them may be ruining the day that they've basically outsourced everything. They thought it was a cheaper way of going, that okay, you just go pick up a gene therapy player once they're through trial 1 or trial 2 here in the US. So that's still occurring, but you may well see some of the bigger boys being more active, buying up more of these genomics players. So we wouldn't be surprised to see some increased M&A from big pharma buying into the gene therapy area.
Okay, question from Annika Paul. CKD has been branded a US epidemic. An executive order was signed on July 10, 2019 by the Trump administration, dedicated to advancing American kidney health. About 30 million people in the US, which is 15% of the adult population, have CKD. Anything of interest? I guess you mean from an investment standpoint.
Dorian, I'm not sure I caught the whole gist of that question. Healthcare is a massive political football here. It's between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats actually want to have more of an NH system here, where it's become more of a socialized system between Canada and the UK type of model. But there's been massive pushback. Obamacare was widely popular amongst the lower and working classes in the US, because all of a sudden people with pre-existing conditions could be covered, and people earning under a certain wage were no longer uninsured. We still have 45 to 50 million uninsured Americans in healthcare. It's a terrible system. The inequality of COVID-19's, the unemployment numbers hitting almost 40 million means that 40 million Americans have fallen off their healthcare rolls just in the last 8 weeks alone. It's a ridiculous situation where you're in a first world country and you have 40 million people who all of a sudden are unemployed and essentially lose their healthcare overnight. They can pay extra money to maintain their healthcare, but it costs a small fortune. It's basically double what they were paying. So it's going to be reformed. It's a political football. It's not going to happen overnight. But we believe that big tech see an opportunity to really muscle their way in here. So I have to just say, just to summarize, it's one of the key battlegrounds of technology that may not have been on people's radars 5 years ago. We see everybody from the likes of Amazon to Google's DeepMind and others. There's some controversy about privacy issues. So I know even in the UK with DeepMind buying up some of your NHS Trust's data, there've been a lot of media articles complaining about it. In the US, they're trying to show that they are sharing data and they are able to basically buy up anonymously reams of data to try and help. It's really with AI and diagnostics that is the reason why they're getting into this. They feel that they can do a better job with computers than, frankly, the average healthcare professional in providing proper diagnosis, particularly in areas that are more unusual, like COVID or diseases that are not common. Martin, maybe you want to jump in.
No, I don't have anything further to add there. Rob, I've got to jump on another call in a couple of minutes.
Okay, Martin, we're going to wrap up now. So just one question to each of you. No, I can't ask that question. I'm not allowed to. I've just been told by the editor it's banned. It's sexually oriented. No, psychedelics. Psychedelics. What's your view on magic mushrooms, psilocybin, and psychedelics? Do you have a view?
I don't know much about that area, but I know a lot of people who I know who are very passionate about it. So I would say I am open-minded to the possibilities of psychedelics.
And?
Yes, I agree with Martin. Open-minded, but it's uninvestable for us because none of the companies are listed right now. But it's an interesting area. There's new research coming out. Yes.
Got it. Martin, thank you. Anthony and Martin, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and we could definitely roll on. What I'm going to do is take the questions that haven't been answered and who sent them, send them to the both of you, and then you can respond to those people. And then Dorian, thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys. On Friday, we have another MedTech story. This is a company that's about to go public in the triage device, data analytics, and AI business. So Anthony and Martin, I'd love you on Friday. It is in the evening, and I think it'll be a great show. And Dorian's going to run it. So, guys, thank you, everyone, and thank you, our audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.